Welcome to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, the clean approach to building your successful business. Now, let's introduce Tom Borg and Dr. Dave Miles. Welcome to episode 6 of Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, where we bring you the clean approach to building your successful business. And by clean, we're not talking about spick and span and dust mops. This show is all about the clean approach. Clean meaning communication, leadership, engagement,
and no drama.
No drama. Absolutely. Well, today for episode 6, we're going to talk about how to stop sabotaging your own good business ideas that work.
Mm-hmm.
One of the biggest challenges for a president or a business owner is to learn a better way to do things and to stick with it. For a lot of us, it's really tempting to try to do something better, change some aspect of our business. And initially, it works well and we implement it and we use it for a while, but eventually for some reason or another, we just stop using it. Why does that happen, Tom?
Well, I think one of the laws that we're trying to fight against is this thing called inertia. Many times people just, that's the biggest thing I think most of my clients have to deal with. I think most human beings, generally speaking, it's this desire to just stay at the same place, doing the same thing, even though you're not too happy with it, you're not too unhappy with it, but it's this inertia, this mud that we get stuck in and we just can't move forward.
Gotcha. I laugh. It's kind of like the old adage about the dog sitting on the nail on the porch. The dog sitting there howling, and why is he howling? He's sitting on a nail. Well, why does he move? Well, it doesn't hurt enough for him to move.
Yeah. That's right.
But it's enough for him to howl, or I guess in more organizational terms, talk trash at the water cooler about it than it would be to actually do something about it. But you talked about people not staying with things long enough to create that behavioral change. I know with the inertia end of it, it's like, Newton's law is about, objects in motion stay in motion, and same thing, objects at rest tend to stay at rest. And it's, let's act it on. And those are hard. It's hard to overcome that organizational inertia that this is our comfort zone. This is the way we do things. This is habit.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work. It's like pushing the boulder uphill. Mm-hmm. It's constant work and constant attention to it. But I think in the end, if there's a new way to do things, it's a lot better.
That's right.
It ends up being worth it. But tell me a little bit about some ideas that you guys had for, and the things that you worked with some of your clients with, as far as trying to overcome a little bit of that organizational inertia, implementing some change, or just building those new habits to kind of build that into the culture.
Well, I think the main thing is we've got to help people, or people have to realize, well, what's in it for me if I do this? Well, how am I going to get better? How's it going to benefit me, my organization? How's it going to make it better enough that it's going to be better than the status quo where we're at right now, where we're not totally satisfied but not totally dissatisfied? So I think we could go to our good friend, Ben Franklin. Good old Ben Franklin. A lot of people don't know this, but he was one of the first millionaires in this country. Can you imagine how much a millionaire was worth back then in today's dollars? I can't even do the numbers. But Ben Franklin, a little thing about Ben, he was a statesman. He was a politician. He was a printer. That's where he made a lot of money. As a matter of fact, he had it set up where he created newspapers. He had several newspapers around the country, however big the country was at the time. But funny thing about it, he would supply the printing for these papers, So it was like, okay, so this guy had a pretty good thing going there. But in any event, very, very intelligent person. But one of the things he came up with, or he was given credit for, is when he was trying to make a hard decision, he'd take a sheet of paper out, he'd draw a line down the middle of it. On one side of the page, he'd say, at the top, he'd write the words, reasons for. On the right, at the top, he'd write reasons against. So he'd go about listing all the reasons why he should go about and do something on the left side. Then he'd list all the reasons why he shouldn't on the right side, just right down the page. And then what he would do, Dave, at the end of that exercise, he would look and see which side weighed heavier, and he'd go with the side that weighed heavier. That allowed him to move forward with the decision rather than to be stuck.
Well, the good thing about that is very logical, very methodical.
Yes.
Very matter of fact. And so it lends itself to a system and a process to And if you
Left brain.
follow that, yeah,
Mhm.
very left brain. If you follow this system, if you follow this process, you're going to get this particular result.
Mhm.
So that's awesome. It was funny that you were talking about him uh, being one of the first millionaires and some of his economic success. And you were thinking to myself, kind of running in my head, index to inflation, what that would mean today. And I mean, that would probably be like a Bezos today or Elon Musk or some
Yes.
millionaire because of the amount of money to what it was worth back in the day. But
Mhm.
it's funny. The thing that struck me was you were talking about how he controlled the whole supply chain.
Mhm.
That he not only printed the papers, but he produced the items that went with him. That's
Yeah.
smart. That's a good way to definitely. You're making money on every transaction.
Mhm. Something we should be more aware of as business people today
Yeah. What can you do
ourselves.
is what can you do to actually? Where's your value chain? Where's your supply chain coming from?
Mhm.
And then how can you kind of build that value chain? And every time that there's exchange of value, that you're part of that, not just the end retailer.
That's right.
Good.
Absolutely.
Good deal. No, I like that process. And like I said, it definitely makes something that's very can be very arbitrary, very systematic and logical.
Yeah, so let's take an idea and give an illustration. So let's say a
Okay.
business owner is saying, "Well, we should really implement this new software system. We've been putting it off, right? We've got
Okay.
this one software system; it's working okay, but there's a lot of things we could be doing with this newer, improved version that came out. But there's going to be some headaches." So they go back and forth and don't really know. So take out a sheet of paper or get your team together, go into the meeting room, get a whiteboard. Top of the whiteboard, at the top, put down on the left all the reasons why we should uh, acquire or purchase this new software system and implement it. Then on the right, all the reasons why we shouldn't. So you start thinking about, let's see, well, one of the things that they would write down if it was going to be a positive, if they were to purchase something like this, is that everyone would be more efficient. Right? That'd be one thing. They'd be able to serve more customers. The customers would be happier because there wouldn't be so many delays. They would eventually have less problems within the organization because people wouldn't be doing double work. You could just list. At the bottom, you could always put down that they'll be more profitable if they do this. Great. If you go over to the right and put the reasons why they shouldn't do this, they might say, well, it's going to take people time to get it up to speed. We're going to have issues. There's going to be bugs to work out of it. Not everyone's going to get the training we need in a timely manner. It could cause problems with our customers when we're trying to deal with them when we can't, the system won't work for us. So these are just some examples, but the idea is if you do it long enough, hard enough, and you can see,
Right.
maybe it isn't the best thing to do right now. Maybe it'll be better 6 months from now. But the fact is, by weighing it out in front of them, this is just one tool now. This is one way to say, well, logically, it looks like here's why we could go ahead and do this and it'd be a good idea. But see, this is anything we can use here that's going to get us past this problem of inertia.
Right.
If we keep going back and forth in our head, that gets us no place. But if we can get it on paper, get it in front of us, we can make a sound decision and then come up with an action plan to follow through. Now we're moving ahead.
Sure. The biggest thing, it sounds like, it's just going from being stuck to unstuck.
Yes,
I mean, that's the
that's
big
right.
thing right there. Is what do we got to do to get unstuck? And
Mm-hmm.
that is one way to do it. That kind of literally just a pro con type of sheet. And
Yes.
something that just kind of popped in my mind that may help business owners, just simply, and this is the facilitator part of me
Mm-hmm.
pulling out. So don't want to get too in the weeds, but this is something that may help if you're doing this in your own team.
Yes.
My first thought initially is the same thing. You throw up the whiteboard, draw the line down it. All right, guys, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
Give me some advice. What do we need to do? But then I always seem to go back and remember there's plenty of folks that will give their opinion. There's lots of times you have to, okay, Joe, what do you
Mm-hmm.
think about it? Because some have to think about it a little bit more.
Sure.
So if you're going to do this, a couple of things that I would suggest, mainly from working with a lot of assessments and a lot of dealing with different behavioral styles and communication styles, if you're going to do this, one, let them know ahead of time that you're doing it,
Mm-hmm.
so that way they have the people that are really your high supportive people, your high S's, your ones that are just real some of the crux and the salt of the earth in the organization
Mm-hmm.
that you couldn't get things done without. Sometimes they need a little bit of extra time to process. You
That's
bring
right.
them into a meeting,
Good point.
You dump this on them, and they're going
Mm,
to freeze, and you're going
that's
to
right.
lack. You're not going to get that valuable input. They got to
Hmm.
think about it a while, but once
Hmm.
they've thought about it, they have some amazing input.
That's
So
right.
that's the first one. And the second one is you can always do. Where listen, you have to be engaging as a facilitator to try to get ideas out of people. But another way to do that is also either have them come to the meeting with it or hand out post-it notes
Hmm.
and have them write their ideas pro and con
Ah,
on the post-it notes.
right.
And you might collect
Hmm.
the pros, give them a few more minutes, collect all the cons, and you put the post-it notes up on the whiteboard.
Sure. That's
And
a
then
great
that
way to
way
do
you
it.
can, and that way it makes it easier
Hmm.
to rank some of these, to what's important, what's not important, move it from one side to the other. So that's just a couple of ideas for
That's,
business owners and
oh
team
yeah,
leaders who may be doing this on their own and not bringing in an outside facilitator, or just a couple things to make sure they get the valuable feedback. Because what you don't want is have all your high I's and all your high D's, all your fast paced people just dominating the conversation.
yes, that's right.
You want to get from the supportive people, from the analytical people. You really want to be able to draw out some outstanding ideas from your whole team,
Sure.
and that takes sometimes a little bit different approach to be able to
Yeah,
do.
and Dave, another point I like to add to that is that it allows them to feel like they're part of the solution. It's not
Yes.
just being done to them. So, as I once heard, people don't argue with their own data. So when they can put up their ideas, now they're part of this process, and it makes it a little easier for them to go along with someone else's idea since they've had a chance to put their ideas up on the board as well. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I had a total squirrel moment. I had
Mm,
a remember years ago when I was in the fire department, and I had a buddy of mine that could pretty much get anything he wanted from this one battalion chief, and I always wondered how they needed for the EMS end of it, they needed backboards for years, and
hmm.
they had them in a closet, and the guy, the EMS at the time was contracted out, and they weren't going to give them out. They were in the closet. I was
Hmm.
like, how did you talk to this guy? Now we got these supplies, and
Hmm.
how did it seem like every time that you need something, you are able to get it? And I was really young at the time,
Hmm.
and a valuable lesson that I learned that goes right along with what you just said was that he always made it. He took and led him down the path by asking certain questions
Oh,
and leaving certain hints. And it
hmm.
made it where the guy came up with the idea himself
Yes.
instead of saying, hey, we need XYZ. You don't need it. Get back to work. Versus you just lay the trail out there. And then all of a sudden, man, I think we really need X, Y, and Z. Really? That's amazing. I'm so glad. Like you said, the guy came up with it himself.
Sure.
It was his idea. And you're right. He never argued with his own ideas. He never argued
Hmm.
with his own data. So, no, great point.
Yes, absolutely. That's just good leadership. Good leadership. Yeah. All
So,
right.
but
So,
so anyway, the next one you talk about Ben Franklin's system, which I think is
yes.
good. But also talked about any time that you do something different,
Hmm.
there's always some type of risk. And I know there's one of the, I guess, implicit in Ben's system
Hmm.
is that you got pros and cons, but you also have risk versus opportunity. Talk to me a
Yes.
little bit about that.
Okay, so let's say, for instance, you're trying to make a decision, and it's not an easy decision. It's not necessarily going to be a cut and dry decision. There are a lot of
Right.
concerns in there. So I remember Nito Cobain sharing this one time, where here's a formula to help you make a very tough decision. There are 5 questions that you have to ask. Okay, first question is you get, and however you want to do it, on a whiteboard, on a sheet of paper, or just on your screen there where you're opening a file and putting all this information in. First question is, what's the worst thing that can happen? Okay, so you answer that question. Well, if we do this, here's the worst thing that's going to happen. Okay. Second, what's the best thing that can happen? Oh, yeah, okay, great. Well, if the best thing could happen, you write that in. Then the third question is, what's the most likely thing that's going to happen? Now, this gets us back down to earth, right?
Right.
So write out the most likely thing that's going to happen. Now, to finish this, you have to answer 2 more questions, and they have to both have the answer yes if you're going to go ahead with this decision. This next question is, if the worst thing should happen, could I live with that? Could this company live with that? Right? And then
Makes sense.
the last question would be, if we go ahead and do this and it does succeed, is it going to actually get us closer to our goals? So those two last questions, very important. Can I live with the worst? And secondly, if we do it and it succeeds, is it really going to help us get closer to our goals?
Gotcha. So what you're saying is basically whether the most likely thing happens or the best case scenario happens, if either of those two things get us a little bit closer to our goals, then that's a positive. That's a yes.
Mm-hmm. It has to get us close to our goals, and we have to be able to live with the worst thing should it happen,
Gotcha.
because it can also backfire. So let's take this into the real world here. So let's say you've got a person that you're thinking about firing for whatever reason. It didn't
Okay.
work out. Okay, so the first question you have is, well, what's the worst thing that would happen if we fired this person? Well, it could be chaos in our department. He has a lot of information. She has a lot of information that not everyone else necessarily knows. Blah 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 blah. Second, what's the best thing that could happen? Well, if this person, we were to sever ties with this person, we'd have a lot less stress in the organization. People would be able to communicate. There would be less fear. It would just be better for the overall service of our clients. Okay, great. Well, what's the most likely thing that would happen if we let this person go? Well, there'd be some chaos, but yes, stress levels would start to go down in other areas, and we'd probably get through it, and we'd find someone else eventually and bring them in and better off. Okay, well, that's fine. Last two questions. What's the worst? Could you live with the very worst thing if it should happen? Well, okay, if we did fire that person and we had this chaos go on, and I mean, we might lose clients. Could we live with that? Okay, yes or no? Yes, good. Then the last one, if we do this, is it going to help us get closer to our goals? If we let this person go, will it actually help us get closer to our goals? Okay, it says yes, we're going to be able to service our clients better. We're going to be a more profitable company. There'll be more harmony. Okay, there you go. But if you say no, this is important. If you have to answer no to any of those, either of those last two questions, then I would recommend not going ahead with that decision.
Gotcha. And that's a tough one, especially when you're talking about termination, because
Oh yeah.
one of the things is, even if one of them is a no, that's a tough, like, for example, and I wouldn't imagine, but just thinking out loud, if the worst thing happens, can I live with it? Even if they take trade secrets, even if they take whatever, is it going to completely destroy your business?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not. But to be honest with you, especially when it comes to firing, one of the things that I love, Gary Vaynerchuk has been talking about this very recently, and a lot of his stuff on LinkedIn. And I laugh because he talks about hiring is guessing, firing is knowing. And I like that because there's no guessing there, and if somebody's creating that toxic environment, a lot of times, I mean, they are a problem. And same thing, will it get me closer to my goals if I get rid of them? Well, probably more efficient, more effective. But if you don't get rid of them, one of the things that I've noticed is that if you are in charge of that middle manager and that middle manager is causing a lot of issues, they may be leading up very well. And it's an episode for a whole different podcast, but just in brief, if they're just toxic in the organization, if you don't get rid of them,
yes,
at some point they stop being the problem and you start being the problem. Because the employees underneath of them and the other staff members know about it, and you're failing to do anything. Now, you're trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. You're trying to not have to fire somebody. You're not have to make that tough decision. A lot of times when you do, and you might not know this when you're answering these 5 questions at first, but after that decision is made, especially for a termination, for somebody who's creating that toxic environment,
right?
Then all of a sudden, in retrospect, you realize, oh my God, why didn't I do that earlier? And then everybody else is shaking their head like, yeah, why didn't you do that earlier? We've been asking you that for 6 months.
Right.
So it's amazing how sometimes you get clarity on those questions in retrospect.
Exactly. So I would think that would be a good tool to employ if you had that tough decision to make, and just makes it a little bit more doable when you use a tool like that.
Cool. No, I like that tool quite a bit. And I know there's a lot of different things you could do, whether it's firing an employee, making a promotion, creating new staff positions.
That's right. Giving
Yeah, investing in training. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
creating anything, you're creating new, closing, opening, doing anything, any kind of major decision, those are great questions to ask. And having those two tools, that kind of pro and con, reasons for, reason against, very left brain from the Franklin School of Thought. And then you
Mm-hmm.
have the kind of the Nito Cobain 5 questions on best thing, worst thing, most likely.
Mm-hmm.
And then can I live with either the best or the most likely, and can I live with the worst case? Will the
Mm-hmm.
one move us closer to our goals, and can I live with the worst case
If it should happen.
if it should happen? Because if the worst case is the whole organization goes out of business, you lose your house, everything, then I probably would stay away from that decision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that risk is too big to take for the opportunity. That those are those Hail Marys, those long shots, those putting it all on the board for that one roll of the dice, and that is way too much risk sometimes. And
That's right.
some people do it, but that's when you're looking at these two models, which are great models for people to be able to take back and use in their organization. I think that's it brings a lot of clarity to it. It at least gives you a system on
Mm-hmm.
two ends of it, the purely logical end of it, and then asking, what will happen and can I live with it? I think is great. So when you talked about approaching that risky and tough decision, that employing those 5 questions, basically you're going to enhance your ratio for successful risk taking.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about that.
Right.
Sounds like you're going to build your self-confidence for future challenges,
That's right.
because
There you go.
if you make good decisions, you get more
Mm-hmm.
confident that the decisions you're making, and you get to rely on the process. You get to trust the process.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be working smarter and not harder, which is obviously a great thing. And
Mm-hmm.
then it really helps you be more of an action oriented executive or action oriented leader, because you have a system to where you're not going to be stuck. You can at least make a decision, yes or no, and keep moving.
That's right. That's exactly right, Dave.
Cool.
Well said. Mm-hmm.
Well, I like that quite a bit. I love those two models that you brought to the table. What final words do you have for some of our listeners about how, let's say, ways that they can stop sabotaging their own good business ideas that work beyond maybe these two models?
Well, I just think of an old saying: you can't get to second base if you leave one foot on first. So what we're saying is, try it out. Try these ideas out. See how they work, and they won't do you any good if you just hear them here today and put them away and not ever use them. So
That's very
that's how I
true.
do it.
Well, at least you have two great tools that you can go back and use
Yes.
today in your organization and to help you with your decision making. And that goes back kind of to the leadership end of it, as far as
Mm-hmm.
the clean approach to building your successful business. So that concludes episode 6. Thank you for listening to Business Smarts Radio with Tom and Dr. Dave, bringing you the clean approach to building your successful business. And we will see you next time with episode 7. Take care.